For 12 years, my life revolved around servers, architecture diagrams, and systems that never slept. I wasn't the kind of employee who attended corporate retreats or chased titles. I was the person everyone called when something broke, when an investor wanted proof of scalability, or when a security vulnerability threatened a $1 million contract. The company didn't grow because of slogans and motivational posters. It grew because systems worked, and those systems worked because I built them. Over time, my work became the invisible foundation that executives leaned on while pretending they understood the machinery that powered their ambitions. Our upcoming $600 million merger was more than a business transaction. It was the company's coronation. The acquiring firm wanted our proprietary architecture, the patents tied to it, and the operational algorithms that had outperformed every competitor in our sector. That architecture was my creation, piece by piece, year after year. Every line of code told a story. Every module held a decision. Every access layer was engineered with a reason. The board knew this. Investors knew this. Most employees suspected it. The only person who didn't understand the weight of what he was handling was the new CEO. He arrived with designer suits and empty metaphors about efficiency. His claim to fame was cutting 23% of operating costs at his previous company, though he rarely mentioned the class action lawsuits that followed. The board adored him because he was young, articulate, and ruthless. They wanted someone who looked like innovation, even if he didn't understand how innovation was built. Within days of his arrival, he started examining payroll figures like a butcher looking for meat to trim. To him, salaries were obstacles, not investments. My name barely registered on his radar at first. He saw my compensation package and reacted the way inexperienced leaders do, by assuming numbers explained value. He didn't ask what I did, why I earned what I earned, or how many failures my decisions had prevented. He didn't attend a single architecture briefing or review a single integration log. He just saw a figure higher than his own comfort zone and decided to remove it. He called it strategic optimization. I called it a decision that would cost him everything. The Thursday morning he fired me, there was no tension in the air. No meeting request. No warning signs. I walked into the office expecting another day of integration testing and compliance preparations. Instead, HR was waiting with a pre-written termination letter, a forced smile, and a cardboard box. The CEO did not attend. He sent a digital signature and a message that read like a motivational poster written by someone who never built anything. The letter claimed the company was moving in a new direction. It didn't specify what that direction was or who would lead the systems that direction relied on. He believed the blueprint lived in the servers. He assumed diagrams were instructions and not interpretations. He didn't realize that what he fired wasn't a salary, it was context. The architecture wasn't static. It evolved. It responded to real-time demands. It knew which subsystem to prioritize during peak loads and which modules were placed as future pivots for expansion. None of that lived on paper. It lived in experience, in intuition refined through failures no spreadsheet could quantify. As I left the building, I glanced back at the glass facade reflecting the sky like a monument to ambition. Inside those walls, a countdown had already begun. But they didn't hear it. Companies rarely do until the sound becomes an explosion. The CEO believed he had trimmed excess. In truth, he had severed the spine of the merger. The system would run for a while, like a body twitching after the head is removed, but the moment it needed adaptation, intelligence, or repair, it would collapse under its own weight. He didn't fire an employee. He triggered a chain reaction no executive could cancel. The merger was designed like a domino line, one flawless push, and everything would fall into place. On paper, it was a masterpiece. Two corporations combining patents, infrastructure, and market dominance into a single juggernaut. Financial analysts praised the move. Journalists speculated about industry disruption. Shareholders anticipated astronomical returns. To outsiders, it looked like destiny. But systems don't care about headlines. They care about logic, and logic doesn't bend for optimism. 3 weeks after my departure, the first crack appeared so small that no one noticed at first. It began with a routine integration test, the kind performed hundreds of times over the previous year. Except this time, the system didn't respond the way it used to. A validation request looped endlessly, searching for credentials tied to my master key. My code had been designed to prevent unauthorized access from rival corporations and disgruntled employees. Ironically, it was now protecting the company from itself. The junior engineers tried to bypass it, assuming it was an outdated security layer. They didn't know that every bypass attempt triggered internal flags, locking down modules one by one. The boardroom temperature shifted from celebration to concern. The executives didn't panic yet. They believed problems could be solved with pressure, authority, or a stern email. They underestimated the difference between understanding diagrams and understanding the spirit behind them. They called the engineering team into emergency meetings, expecting confident answers. Instead, they received nervous excuses. The team admitted they didn't know how to access certain proprietary pathways. They didn't even know they existed. The CEO brushed it off as incompetence. He had no idea he was staring directly at the cost of his decision. The investors, however, noticed. They weren't impressed by motivational speeches or confident smiles. They wanted proof, printed, time-stamped, and verifiable. They demanded compliance reports, architecture signatures, and confirmation that the infrastructure was fully operational. Those documents required my credentials. Not my workstation. Not my laptop. My digital fingerprint, embedded inside the system like a heartbeat. When they tried to generate new certificates without it, the system treated them as intruders. Servers didn't care about titles. They cared about identity, and to them, the CEO had none. Meanwhile, the legal teams grew uneasy. They understood what executives refused to accept. Ownership of a system without operational authority is meaningless. The acquiring firm wanted guarantees, access logs, chain of custody signatures, and confirmation that the architecture belonged to the company and not to an individual. For every request, the CEO stalled, promising documentation in progress. But progress can't replace a key that never existed outside one mind. Every unanswered email added another crack. The acquiring firm began sending late-night queries through private channels, bypassing official correspondence. They wanted to understand why a supposedly ready system refused to cooperate. When rumors leaked that essential credentials were missing, shareholders reacted like predators sensing blood in the water. Stock projections dipped. Confidential meetings multiplied. The merger team lost sleep. Inside the company, fear became a silent employee. Engineers whispered in hallways. Managers suggested reaching out to me discreetly. The CEO refused, insisting leadership meant standing firm. But leadership without knowledge is stubbornness disguised as courage, and stubbornness is useless against code that does not negotiate. The perfect deal didn't collapse in a single moment. It sagged inward, quiet and steady, like a bridge built without considering weight distribution. Every requirement delayed, every signature missing, every system unresponsive added another silent fracture. The board, once united in confidence, began to question decisions they had applauded weeks earlier. The CEO still smiled, unaware that confidence without competence is a rope with no anchor. What no one realized yet was simple. The merger wasn't failing because I was gone. It was failing because they assumed I was optional. The simulation was supposed to be a formality, a ceremonial rehearsal before the grand merger announcement. Executives had invited analysts, consultants, and a few influential shareholders to witness how effortlessly our technology would integrate with the acquiring corporation's platform. The room smelled of confidence, fresh coffee, polished leather chairs, and the kind of optimism only people far from the machinery can afford. They believed the night would end with applause. Instead, it ended with a silence so heavy it felt like structural damage. The test began at 7 p.m. The operations team initiated the usual authentication sequence, expecting the servers to handshake with the external platform. But instead of the familiar confirmation logs, the system entered a recursive validation loop. Authentication requests bounced back like unanswered knocks on a locked door. The engineers frowned, assuming a minor credential mismatch. They reinitiated the handshake. The system rejected it again. Then again. On the fourth attempt, the load increased unexpectedly, as though the system was bracing itself against intrusion. What they didn't understand was simple. The architecture wasn't malfunctioning. It was defending itself. By 7:15, the logs turned red. Core modules, critical ones that stabilized financial routing, legal encryption, and intellectual property controls, refused to open. Every attempt to access them triggered secondary locks I had designed years earlier to protect against industrial espionage. Those locks required not just passwords, but a layered sequence of manual acknowledgments tied to my internal token. My departure had removed the only fingerprint capable of waking the sleeping system. Panic spread not in screams, but in tones, voices that tightened, breaths that shortened, hands that trembled over keyboards. Engineers who once boasted about scalability now looked like passengers on a plane whose pilot had vanished. They tried bypass scripts, emergency overrides, and forced resets. The system answered every effort with the indifference of a sealed vault. By 7:30, the acquiring corporation's observers began exchanging glances. Their lead auditor leaned forward, studying the logs like an archaeologist deciphering unknown glyphs. He asked for the signature chain validating system ownership. No one could provide it. One manager stammered something about ongoing transitions, but his voice betrayed the truth. There was no transition. There had been a guillotine. The CEO arrived at 7:42, summoned from a dinner he'd been bragging his way through. He expected a minor hiccup, the kind he believed leadership could resolve by raising his voice. Instead, the first thing he saw was a room of senior engineers staring at screens they no longer understood. The second thing he heard was my name, spoken softly, reverently, and with a kind of dread. It wasn't nostalgia. It was recognition. He demanded explanations. The engineering lead told him the truth in cautious fragments. The system wasn't failing, it was obeying its design. It trusted experience over hierarchy. It required knowledge that couldn't be replaced by titles, degrees, or confidence. The CEO asked for the documentation. They showed him the binders, thousands of pages of diagrams that looked like instructions, but held none of the reasoning behind their creation. Documentation can tell you what something is. It cannot tell you why. And without why, a system is a ghost, visible, untouchable, and terrifying. By 8:10 p.m., the CEO's swagger evaporated. He finally grasped what the board hadn't. The architecture wasn't a product. It was an ecosystem, grown, calibrated, and nurtured through choices invisible to anyone who hadn't lived inside it. They had assumed a system this complex could be inherited like furniture. They didn't realize it required stewardship. They thought firing me removed an expense. But in that room, watching millions of dollars melt into confusion, they understood the truth. They hadn't eliminated a job. They had removed the memory that kept the company alive. The voicemail came first, an uncharacteristically short message from a man who never used fewer than 3 sentences to greet a room. I ignored it. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, his number flashed across the screen. The CEO who once dismissed me as a legacy cost was now calling outside business hours. People don't dial numbers they believe are beneath them, unless the world they built is burning, and the only fire extinguisher they ever had now lives somewhere else. I answered on the 4th ring. Not because I was waiting, but because curiosity occasionally deserves oxygen. His voice, usually sharp and polished, sounded like paper rubbed against stone. He tried to open with confidence, but confidence without leverage is theater. He asked about my well-being as though we were old friends who had simply drifted apart. That false warmth evaporated the moment he tried to hide a tremor in his voice. Silence has texture, and his carried panic wrapped in formality. He told me the company was facing unexpected technical hurdles. That was his first lie. Nothing about the situation was unexpected. You cannot fire the sole architect of a proprietary ecosystem weeks before merging that ecosystem with another corporation and then be shocked when it collapses. He tried to present his request as an opportunity, describing it as a chance to finish what we started together. He didn't mention the board breathing down his neck, the investors calling hourly, or the auditors threatening to walk away. He didn't have to. The urgency smuggled itself into every syllable. Then came the offer. He matched my previous salary before I could take a breath, then doubled it. He added a title, Chief Systems Strategist, as if rearranging the alphabet around my job description would inflate its value. He promised bonuses, benefits, and broad authority. He avoided mentioning the real reason I was fired. He wanted a trophy merger and saw me as an expensive ornament. Now, without the mind behind the code, he was holding a vault he couldn't open and begging the locksmith to return. I listened without interrupting. Not because I was undecided, but because watching a man negotiate with consequences he created was oddly educational. When he finished, he paused, likely expecting gratitude, relief, maybe even excitement. Instead, I asked him one question: who owns the architecture? He hesitated, and the hesitation was the confession. The board had discovered what he pretended not to know. A system is not owned by those who pay for it, but by those who understand it. I declined. Not with anger. Anger grants power. I refused with clarity. I told him the truth. I no longer worked in environments where urgency only mattered when leadership felt threatened. I didn't accept positions where responsibility was demanded but authority was rationed. If they needed me, they needed a partner, not an employee. They needed equity, influence, and contractual respect. Anything less was just repeating the past, except this time, with more zeros and fewer illusions. He tried persuasion. He blamed misunderstandings. He hinted at internal sabotage. He wrapped excuses in corporate vocabulary so dense it nearly sounded rational. But panic masquerading as logic is still panic, and desperation doesn't negotiate, it begs. In the end, his voice cracked not with emotion, but with the unspoken realization that he wasn't talking to the man he fired. He was talking to the man whose absence had become their largest liability. I ended the call with a sentence that required no explanation: you don't need my position filled. You need your decision corrected. He didn't respond. Some mistakes echo, others invoice. The moment the system froze, time transformed from a neutral measurement into an executioner. Every passing hour carried a financial consequence that no spreadsheet could disguise. The merger had been announced with fanfare, press releases, interviews, and projected revenue models circulating like gospel. Analysts praised the deal, predicting a new market titan. But those forecasts depended on one condition: operational continuity. Without it, the valuation wasn't just unstable, it was fiction. Within 12 hours of the simulation failure, the acquiring company's financial department demanded updated infrastructure reports. The documents they received were incomplete, fragmented, and filled with placeholders no one had authority to validate. Valuation models began to falter. Investment bankers, once confident, quietly recalculated risk variables. The tone across internal communications shifted from enthusiasm to guarded inquiry. Everyone understood that mergers are not broken by facts, but by doubt, and doubt now had a pulse. By the next morning, lawyers entered the arena. They reviewed clauses meant for unforeseen complications. These were boilerplate provisions, the kind management never reads because they imagine expertise can outrun liability. Suddenly, those clauses became shields and weapons. The acquiring firm's attorneys questioned ownership of the proprietary architecture. Was it fully transferable? Were credentials complete? Did the selling company truly control what it claimed to own? Without my digital signature, the answer was no. Compliance officers followed. They froze technical accounts, halted data exchange, and suspended sandbox environments. Their mandate was simple: protect investors from purchasing a system mired in ambiguity. Compliance doesn't care about excitement or vision, it cares about verifiable control. When they requested architecture lineage certificates and received silence, the implications became clear. A system without provable ownership isn't an asset, it's a liability waiting for litigation. The CEO attempted damage control. He scheduled emergency meetings, crafted reassuring statements, and issued internal memos insisting everything was under assessment. But words cannot fix infrastructure, and confidence cannot authenticate code. Meanwhile, the acquiring company's board convened behind closed doors. Their analysts compiled scenarios showing losses escalating by the hour. Every missing credential reduced valuation. Every unanswered question drained leverage. What once promised monopolistic power now looked like a black hole for capital. Whispers circulated through the industry. Competitors smelled blood. Rumors evolved faster than facts. Investors speculated that the architecture might not belong to the company at all, that it relied on an individual no longer employed. Some believed the system was unfinished. Others suggested it had been sabotaged. None of these stories were accurate, but accuracy is less important in finance than perception. Markets react not to truth, but to the belief that truth might be dangerous. Stock prices reflected the anxiety. Brokers who had once boasted about early entry into a transformative merger quietly sold shares before the market detected the tremor. By afternoon, those tremors became waves. Financial journalists noticed unusual activity and requested comments. The company declined, which confirmed suspicion. Transparency is expected when everything is stable. Silence implies disaster. Inside headquarters, the mood resembled a hospital waiting room. People paced hallways, clutching laptops, hoping for a miracle fix that did not exist. Managers barked orders no one could follow. Junior engineers dug through code they barely understood, knowing the answers they sought weren't written anywhere. Leadership finally recognized the trap they had built, but by then, the clock's rhythm had become sentencing. The valuation didn't collapse in one dramatic plunge. It decayed incrementally, like fruit left in sunlight. Each hour drained millions, each meeting drained confidence, and each rumor drained the company's future. The merger, once declared unstoppable, now carried the same energy as a contaminated site, expensive to approach and dangerous to inherit. In the end, the company didn't run out of money. It ran out of credibility, and credibility is the only currency a $600 million deal cannot survive without. The board convened on a Wednesday morning, long before sunrise had fully claimed the skyline. Their faces, usually composed and calculating, carried an expression seldom seen among people accustomed to control fear disguised as irritation. The merger, once a symbol of prestige, had mutated into a threat. Investors demanded explanations. Journalists hinted at scandal. Competitors waited like vultures circling a limping animal. The board had one question that overshadowed all others. How could a multi-million-dollar corporation be technologically dependent on a single individual? The CEO entered the room later than everyone else, walking with the kind of forced confidence that cracks under inspection. He brought slides, charts, and rehearsed statements, props meant to manufacture authority. But authority holds no weight when results are collapsing in real time. He began his presentation with corporate cliches about unexpected disruptions and legacy complications. His tone suggested that the crisis was a mere inconvenience, a temporary setback. The board did not blink. One director, a veteran of 3 hostile takeovers, interrupted without ceremony. She asked a precise question: who architected the closed system protocols the acquiring firm cannot access? The CEO stumbled. He tried to deflect, implying that documentation should have sufficed. He suggested my departure had been exaggerated into a problem by certain disgruntled employees. It was a clumsy attempt to shift blame toward someone not in the room. Unfortunately for him, the audit team was. The lead auditor clicked a remote, replacing the CEO's slides with their findings. The screen filled with timestamps, digital signatures, and version control histories so detailed they resembled a forensic investigation. Every module, every security trigger, every compliance layer pointed to a single name: mine. The architect fingerprints didn't lie. Nor did the evolution logs charting 12 years of iterative development. The infrastructure wasn't a product with interchangeable parts. It was a living organism shaped by decisions only one person fully understood. On the second slide, a comparison chart showed the system's operational dependencies. 92% of mission-critical processes flowed through structures I had built. The remaining 8% interfaced with them. The implications were brutal. The company hadn't owned the architecture. It had been borrowing it. Silence settled across the boardroom. A silence so thick it felt like insulation. It wasn't the silence of contemplation. It was the silence people produce when reality strips away illusion. The CFO finally exhaled and asked the question everyone else was avoiding. Did you fire the only person who could certify our infrastructure? The CEO hesitated for 3 seconds, long enough for the answer to become a verdict. He attempted another defense. He labeled my salary excessive, framed my departure as a cost-efficiency maneuver, and insisted that any competent technical team should replicate my work. The board wasn't buying it. Their expressions hardened. One member produced the original proposal recommending my retention until post-merger integration. The CEO had ignored it. He wanted savings. Instead, he set fire to the valuation. Then the audit revealed something worse. Not only had I built the systems, I had created fail-safes, industry-standard protections against unauthorized access. These protections were legally required and documented. The company had approved every layer, every token, every encryption measure. My name appeared beside each approval. The board realized the architecture didn't fail because I was absent. It failed because someone assumed ownership without understanding stewardship. The room no longer felt like a boardroom. It felt like a courtroom, and the CEO, once hailed as the savior of modernization, now resembled a defendant awaiting sentencing. No one raised their voice. They didn't have to. The silence held the verdict, the consequences, and the weight of their mistake. They had not dismissed an employee. They had amputated their infrastructure and expected the patient to walk. The board finally understood. I wasn't an expense on a ledger. I was the foundation they mistook for decoration. The announcement was scheduled for a Monday morning. The press release had been drafted, reviewed, and polished until every sentence glittered with confidence. The company planned a live broadcast, invitations had been sent, and industry analysts cleared their schedules. The merger was set to become the biggest corporate event of the quarter. But by dawn, the excitement had curdled into catastrophe. What was supposed to be a celebration now resembled a disaster site waiting for confirmation of casualties. The first blow struck before sunrise. The acquiring corporation issued a confidential request for proof of full operational access to the proprietary architecture. They demanded confirmation that the system could be transferred without dependency. The reply they received wasn't hostile, it was worse. It contained no documentation at all. It simply stated that access was pending review, a phrase that in corporate language means, we don't have what we claimed we had. That single phrase detonated the merger's credibility. Within an hour, the acquiring firm's legal division invoked the preliminary escape clause. It allowed them to withdraw if ownership, compliance, or continuity could not be unambiguously demonstrated. They didn't even wait for a rebuttal. Their lawyers drafted a withdrawal letter so quickly it was clear they had been preparing it for days. That letter became the pebble that rolled down the mountain. At 8:14 a.m., traders noticed unusual activity, massive sell orders placed against the company's stock. These were not cautious exits. They were evacuations. Investors, sensing smoke, acted as if flames were visible. The market doesn't care about explanations. It reacts to survival instincts. In minutes, the company's valuation plunged. Phones rang, not with congratulations, but demands for accountability. Stockholders who once celebrated the CEO's bravado now wanted his resignation. Then the media arrived. The first headline came from a respected financial outlet known for brutal accuracy. It read, "Merger stalls over missing architecture signatures." Other outlets copied the tone but sharpened the angle. Tech firm can't access its own systems. Who really owns the platform? Was the merger built on vaporware? The headlines multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Overnight, a corporate darling had turned into a punchline. Partners panicked. Suppliers paused shipments. Vendors halted integrations. Everyone who once benefited from proximity to the company now treated it like radioactive waste. People rarely stay near a sinking ship unless they're hoping to salvage debris. Competitors sensed opportunity and launched marketing campaigns boasting reliability and innovation, thinly veiled jabs aimed at the corporation now drowning in ridicule. They didn't need to mention the company's name. Everyone understood who they were mocking. By lunchtime, industry analysts appeared on financial television, dissecting the crisis. They blamed leadership, mismanagement, ego, and catastrophic oversight. One commentator framed it perfectly. They didn't lose the merger. They lost the right to be trusted. Trust is corporate oxygen. Once it evaporates, the only question left is how long until the collapse completes. It didn't take long. At 2:53 p.m., the acquiring company filed an official withdrawal with the Regulatory Commission. The document didn't mention technical deficiencies in detail. It didn't have to. The language was precise, cold. Meanwhile, the company that fired me occupies only a fraction of its former headquarters. The parking lot used to overflow during peak hours. Now it looks like an abandoned mall. Departments that once buzzed with ambition exist only on outdated organizational charts. Their talent pool evaporated, not because people lacked loyalty, but because people refused to drown with a ship whose captain mistakes confidence for navigation. Employees learned what the board learned too late. Leadership isn't measured by announcements. It's measured by decisions no one wants to be responsible for. The CEO who fired me vanished from corporate life under the polite euphemism of health reasons. It was the kind of departure that avoids lawsuits and headlines. He didn't suffer a medical crisis. He suffered a reality crisis, one diagnosis modern management still fails to treat. His final days in the building were a study in avoidance. He spoke less, delegated more, and retreated behind closed doors as though silence could erase consequences. That silence didn't protect him. It preserved the memory of his mistake. The board still blames him. Publicly, they frame it as an isolated misjudgment, a cautionary tale about impulsive decision-making. Privately, they know better. Their internal reports mention structural oversight failures, risk management gaps, and governance blind spots. But none of those phrases capture the truth. The truth is simple enough for a child to understand. They removed the foundation and expected the building to stand. I wasn't a line item. I wasn't a cost center. I was the architecture, the logic, the history, and the connective tissue that held their system together. They believed replacing me was equivalent to swapping hardware. They never understood that systems don't respond to titles. They respond to the people who built them. Ironically, the collapse of their merger became the launch of my empire. Companies that once ignored my recommendations now invite me into boardrooms before they approve expansions. They don't ask whether I can fix something. They ask whether it should exist in the first place. That distinction has become my currency. I don't rescue businesses. I recalibrate them. I don't rebuild burned bridges. I show them the river they never realized they burned them over. Looking back, I don't feel vindication. Vindication implies a desire to be proven right. I never needed that. Systems always tell the truth, eventually. They expose arrogance, reveal shortcuts, and humiliate those who believe complexity can be managed by enthusiasm alone. The company thought they were firing an employee. What they erased was the blueprint of their future. And blueprints don't revenge. They simply wait for someone else to build something smarter.